Let's talk about monitors. I just went down this crazy whopping journey and I have to share it with you. I tried ATC 45s. I tried Genelec 8361As. I tried Kii Threes. If you're interested in any of these, I hope you find this helpful. And if you're not, please throw in the comments something that you like to use so there can be some kind of consensus of other price points, what people like, and maybe there'll be some information there others will find helpful, and I'd appreciate that. So let me start by saying I found a lot of use and loved for years NS10s. I really like them. There is a significant bass roll-off, which you can kind of improve a little bit by keeping them closer together, I found. But what will ultimately happen, you'll probably want to sub with them. So what I wound up doing is using NS10s, first with this crazy, janky, 10-inch sub that was like part of a stereo system, and I took out the speakers of the system, leaving just the sub, and used the auxiliary in, MacGyver style. It wound up doing a thing. It worked for a little bit. Then I wound up changing that sub out for a KRK sub. And that right there, which is a relatively affordable system, worked for a really long time for me in the beginning. Then I wound up using these Barefoot 01s. Prior to the NS10s, I used Event 2020s, and I felt like I couldn't mix for dog on them. Literally nothing. So I then turned to the NS10s and was like, wow, the world is now clear, and I could mix on them. Then I used the Barefoot 01s. The Barefoot 01 sounded very good for a long time to me, but then I realized that it's like anything else. When you have one microphone, you think it's the best microphone in the world until you get another one that sounds better, and then you go, wow, it's not that good. Just like with speakers. So as you progress on your journey through speakers, you're going to probably find a similar thing. What I noticed was this about these different speakers. The ATC 45s allowed me to mix so well, so quick. Like, it took no learning curve. Just pop them up, tried them. The first place I tried them, I made a mix in about 4 hours that sounded pretty good on multiple sets of systems, to the point where I was like, this is really kind of amazing. The first mix I do on these things translates really well, just kind of works. I was like, that's cool. Are they lacking anywhere? It's widely touted, spoken about, known that people say it lacks a little low end. It's lacking, 30 hertz, 40 hertz, 50 hertz. Yeah, a little bit, maybe a little bit, but it didn't stop me from making this mix sound very good. What it might stop you from doing is hearing things that exist in those registers if you're doing electronic music, or something like, club banging type music that has a lot of stuff down there. You may need to hear some of that. You may just want a sub of some kind with it. Now, you don't have to pair ATC sub with ATC speakers. You can if you want. A lot of people do, but you could easily get a sub from another company that's not as expensive and combine it with those speakers if you want. Now, important to note that my room is very well treated. We're talking ceiling clouds, the walls, it's literally treated. I had those speakers freestanding at the time I tried the ATCs, and I never really felt like it was lacking bass when I listened to pretty much anything that I like to listen to. I have a bunch of references that span the gamut. The Wallflowers, mixed by Tom Lord Alge, the song One Headlight, is one of my favorite references. It tells me so much about what speakers are doing. So when I listen to that, some Brendan O'Brien mixes, some Stone Temple Pilots stuff, some Red Hot Chili Pepper stuff, I know exactly what they're supposed to sound like on particular songs. And I wind up putting those on just to kind of gauge where I'm at, what it's giving me. Such an enjoyable listening experience. Like, specifically, you listen to Rage Against the Machine stuff, you know what you're going to get. You're going to get loud guitars. You're going to get, should be a good amount of bass. It should be like low end nice. Guitars kind of rule those mixes, a lot of them, but the low end is always very present and nice sounding. That's how I would put it, I guess. Nice, like not nice, but nice. So I'm listening. I never felt like it lacked low end. I literally loved the way they sounded. And there's a little break-in period there, so you have to listen to music, just kind of keep it playing for a while in order for them to start to open up. I didn't notice such a substantial difference when they opened up, but they did get better. They did get sweeter, and I did like it both ways, before they opened up and then once they opened up. I liked it both ways. And I could tell you this, absolutely, for some reason, when I put up the Genelecs, my experience was very different. And not because the speaker is bad by any means. If you like Genelecs, you own Genelecs, and that's your thing, some people like different speakers for reasons that are related to their, anatomy, how their ears work, what's going on with the way they hear that would make it complementary for a speaker to work better or worse. Like on the Genelecs, I noticed that certain songs that I would, like tripping on a hole in a paper heart, that one. Tripping on a hole, I don't know, whatever that's called, which is one of my favorite songs, but it's got a weird title, so I can never remember. Is it tripping down a hole, tripping on a hole? I don't know. But either way, the guitar solo in there is one of my favorite guitar solos, like ever. I have a lot, but that's one of them. And it sounds too loud in this room. In this room, on the Genelecs, it sounds too loud. In this room, not only too loud, but like a little painful. Like I would have lowered it. If I was mixing that song, I'd have lowered it. And you know what I never, ever feel when I hear that song anywhere else? I never feel the guitar solos too loud. Ever. So I'm like, these speakers are biting in those pokey guitar frequencies, maybe around 3K-ish, and it's tearing my head off a little bit to the point where I would make this lower because it's too harsh. So that tells me things. I listen to something like, a lot of these songs are 90s songs, but that's like some of this stuff I've heard so many times I can't help but know exactly what it sounds like. The kick drum on track 5, Red Hot Chili Peppers, the album with Under the Bridge, BSSM, everywhere in the world, I always notice the kick sounds like a lot of top end, very clear, very present, but I never feel like it's harsh and annoying and too loud and too clicky. As soon as I hear it on the Genelecs, I literally had to turn the music down a little. I was like, this is kind of hurting me, and it's annoying. Like, it's pokey. Now, keep in mind also, I'm using the GLM software. I'm trying them in different positions. I tried them freestanding up by the desk, and I moved them to the wall. The experience was the same pretty much no matter where I did listen to these things. There was always like this doesn't sound like I'm used to. Now, to me, that's a huge tell for you can't mix on them. Because when you listen to the Cannonball song by the Breeders, if you ever heard Cannonball, the last thing I ever thought was her vocal is loud in that song. You don't think that. And then I listened to it on the Genelecs, and I'm like, why is the vocal so loud? Like, it's louder than I've ever heard it, and it's almost like needs to come down. But if you would have brought that vocal down and you listen to that anywhere else in the world, it would be way too low because it's barely audible now. So it's barely audible on every other system ever through time. So like what I'm saying is the way I hear makes those Genelecs not work because I'm too sensitive in the areas that those Genelecs push. They're pushing in a spot that I can't take. It doesn't work for me. So this is the magic of having reference tracks you really, really know. Now, when I worked on the Genelecs, the same thing held true. The mixes I would make in the room sounded one way, got it to sound good. I get everywhere else, cars, different places to listen, and it wasn't the same. I was like, this is so crazy different than what I just was listening to. When I did that on the ATC, I mixed on the ATC and I took it into other places. I was like, this is so close to what I was hearing in the room. So there's this weird thing there that you have to take note of. Now, the reason I returned the ATC 45s was because when I took them out of the box, put them on the stand, then I took the plastic off the front, in the port was something weird. There was like netting in there, this scrunched up netting, and it wasn't in the other one. So I took photos and I sent it to ATC. I go, what is this? And they told me that's the inner lining somehow of the speaker that came loose and is now in the port. And I don't know if they said inner lining or outer mesh or some words like that. So it's not really relevant because I'm sure this won't happen to you. It was a weird freak thing that they've never experienced probably, is sitting in the port. And they said, you got to ship, you should ship those back, blah, blah, blah. So I was like, oh, wow. Okay. So I have to return these. So return those. And, that's when I was basically onto the Genelecs and being like totally dissatisfied for me and my ears. But I have to say this, if you don't own a Trinov, those Genelecs, with the GLM software is a very cool thing, because they made it those Genelecs sounded best like not even using the Trinov, in my opinion. Genelecs with that software that basically is like $200, kind of something like that you can buy with the speakers. They created a very, I don't know, it was better than the Trinov is all I could tell you. So you don't need a Trinov, but it did kind of not work for me. If you're someone who loves that area of frequency, like, anywhere from like 2.5 to 3.5K ish, somewhere in there, pushing out very hard, that might be a nice speaker for you. But for me, my ears are way too sensitive in that area that it was just not right. So I didn't like it. But it could have even been a little lower on the frequency spectrum. I don't know exactly where it was. All I know is it hurt. It wasn't working. But there's tons of low end on those Genelecs. So if you're a person who loves low end and you want that really kind of pokey speaker, really sounded great. If you want that, for me, couldn't take it, could not take it. So what I wound up doing was trying out these Kii Threes. Now, when I tried the Kii Threes, I had them first freestanding, so like up by the desk, 3/4 of the way into the room kind of thing. I was like, all right, let's try these things. Turned it on, and I just couldn't get them to sound good. Now, this was flying in the face of everything I heard about how great these sound. So I did a bunch more research, and people said you got to put them near the wall, because a big thing they talked about was when they don't have the headroom. You can't crank them up and get them to sound as great as they could be. As soon as you start getting near the top of the spectrum, it's going to distort and not sound good. This is exactly the experience that I had. I was basically like, why did people recommend these to me? They sound awful. And then as soon as I put them near the wall, they performed brilliantly. Now, when I say brilliantly, let me clarify this. They were probably the best speakers I've ever heard for listening to music, but I couldn't mix on them. So I literally tried so many different things with them, in addition to slightly turned in more, slightly turned out more, a little closer to the wall, no treatment behind them, a little bit of treatment behind them, mess with the EQ thing and the key control. I tried so much stuff. And the troubling part was that everything in the room sounded so good all the time that I didn't really know what to do when I was mixing. No matter what I did, it sounded good. Everything was not a problem. And then you get to the car and it sounds completely different. You get to any other system, it doesn't sound anything like what you were hearing in the room. That was my experience. So I have a theory on this, which I'll just real quick throw out there. I think when you put these speakers with the BXT, the bass system, which costs as much as the speakers do, so you double the cost of it, all of a sudden then you get more clarity. So everyone who really loves these things and was like, blown away by the performance of them, they're probably used to hearing the full system, because I bet you the speaker sounds nothing like this when you can get all the low end moved to the bottom and then the mid-range is totally clear with the tweeter. It's like that sort of the part I'm hearing would sound way better if it didn't have to also produce low end, because it produces a ton of low end. I mean, it sends vibrations through the entire place. It produces low end as if it's a sub. So like, there's no question the Kii 3 does a great thing for certain people. If you record, you're the guy recording yourself, you're making your own music and you just want everything to sound great all day, the Kii 3 is great. If you got people in the room you're trying to impress with what you just recorded for them, they're going to be like, wow, I've never heard myself sound so great. But if you're somebody who's mixing, you don't want that, in my opinion. You want it to tell you what's wrong, not to make everything sound great. Music's never sounded so good when I put it through here, ever. It sounded amazing. But then when you go to the rest of the world, it doesn't sound as good. you're leaving all the amazingness in the room, which is good for certain things. Like literally, there are people who record people who want them to be dazzled when they sit in the room to hear what they just recorded. This would do that. It would absolutely do that. And there's so much low end that you could mix hip hop, you could mix electronic, you could do anything with these. But that doesn't mean it's going to sound like a good mix when you get out into the world. For me, it didn't work like that. So I can't really explain it any other way other than everyone here is different. And I, maybe after hearing the 45s, I was sort of missing how well the ATC 45s led me to the path of what to do. Like, I was very surprised at the difference there between translation. I was very surprised because if you decide you're a mixer and you want to do that, you are critically listening from a point of view that's severely different than an audiophile, or severely different from someone who's literally just trying to make anything they do sound as great as possible so that they really enjoy themselves while they're doing it. That's really the hugely different thing. And the Kii Threes do a thing that's very cool where you can kind of negate the effects of being near walls and stuff because they have a technology that's nifty in a way that you can compensate for boundaries. You can it does so many things that are interesting. But I have to tell you, in my experience, I tried all of it. I tried using it with no boundary EQ, with the boundary EQ maxed out, with the boundary EQ halfway, with the trin off, without the trin off. Tried it all ways, didn't work for me. Tried it near the wall, close to the desk. So when you've exhausted the possibilities, I was forced to look back and go, all right, I kind of know what the solution is for me. And what I also know is that if you did want the keys, you don't really need the bottom, but I bet you they're different speakers if you got it. So if you're trying to mix through them or master through them or something, critically listening is where that's the most important thing, is critically listening for what is wrong. The bottom may create a whole different experience once you add that, but that's not in the cards. So that's not something I was ever considering. It's twice as much as was on the thought process of what I would be spending. So I'm forced to go, these don't work either. I also had a weird situation with the Kii Threes, which, just talk about weird situation after weird situation. But, the Kii Threes were, I don't even want to get into it, but they were basically shipped with a power cable that didn't go with the Kii Threes. Very strange. And nobody knows what happened with it, but everybody's handling it great. So great. Kii is an awesome company in terms of responsiveness and get back to you and talk to you on the phone. Like they're thorough. So I had, the back and forth with ATC was great. The back and forth with Kii was great. All the back and forths has been great. So this is not a disparaging thing about the company at all, of any of these companies. It's really about my experience and the fact that I think it's important to decide what you want to do. Because it's not the same speaker if you want one to sound good as if you want one to be able to mix your best on. And everyone here is different. So let's talk about what's good. Because the Kii Threes had so much bass, I was able to really put a song out with a lot of bass, walk around the premises, and hear what that did to everywhere outside of my studio. And I could tell you this, I realized at that moment that I cannot use a subwoofer in my setup because I don't want to disturb the world around me. So, someone like me, sometimes I listen loud, but most of the time it's not that loud. But if I decide to turn up at random hours, because I work crazy hours, a lot of times I feel like that would bug or bother the world around me, in which case I would be all messed up because I don't want to ever put people off that are around me just trying to live. And I also don't want to have my setup kind of, I don't want to have to work low all the time. So to me, what that meant was I can't get the 45s with a sub because that was my thought process at first. So I'm going to splurge and go a little bit up from that and get the ATC 50s, which are more money. They were not on my list, but I did decide that ultimately my goal is to not buy speakers for a very long time and to also know that I'm getting the experience that I loved so much with the 45s, but also a little more clarity in the low end, which the 50s should bring to the table. You know, very clear low end, not a lot of it, less than the Kiis, which in my case is actually okay because it won't be as bothersome, because low frequencies is what will disturb the neighbors every time. Every time. You really, I mean, mid-range and high-end pales in comparison to what low-frequency waves will do to vibrations and the floor and through the ceiling and through the walls. So if you're a person who loves the low end and the bass and stuff, you got to have the facility for it where there's nothing around you, in my opinion, right? Or you bug everybody. Your call. But in my specific case, I watched Ben Baptiste mix a song by The Strokes that was literally, it had an 808 as the foundation of the song, and he mixed it amazingly with 50s and no sub. And it's like, no matter who you talk to, who's used them, that some people are very close, that I'm very close with, when they explain to me the deal, they're like, you get used to clear low end that is not the same as lots of low end, lots of dirty low end. It's just not the same. So you get used to it, and then you wind up being able to hear just fine. And I can tell you from my experience with the 45s that is the only thing that would have made that 45s experience a little better. That's why I said a lot of people who wind up using those use them with some kind of sub or something, or they just get used to it. It's one or the other. And I do believe you could just get used to that. If it's in your purview to be able to spend a little more, sell a piece of gear or two, and now you can afford it, it might be worth going with the 50s. But and keep this in mind, that's in a treated room too. If you don't have a treated room, the ATCs will perform very differently. And like, how much treatment is a treated room, right? So a lot of stuff comes into play here. But in my given situation, with what I have, the ATC 50s, I think, will perform better than anything. And I haven't had them in this room yet, but I could tell you, I'm not worried in the slightest. So I hope this was somehow helpful. And if you do have questions, throw them in there. But my experience going through this whole thing just made me realize so many things. It made me realize that no matter how good a speaker sounds, if you cannot mix in a way that translates to the world, it's not a good mixing speaker for you. It may be great to make you feel great about music and just listening to music, but that's not what we're going for. We're going for a tool if you're a mixing engineer. We need something that's going to tell us what the problems are. So for me, the answer was clear. And this conversation and everything, like, just so you know, I've tried the Kiis through, with the digital, in other words, people say this all the time. Anybody who doesn't like the Kiis probably hasn't used them the right way. They're not using the digital in, blah, blah. No, I tried every in. I tried it all. Like, what are you talking about? I'm going to sit over here and not try an in. I tried the analogs. I tried the digital. I tried everything there is. There's no way that I can make that speaker a speaker that I can mix through and just go to the car and be like, yep, it's the same. I go to the car and go, what? So very different experiences, very different. And yet, when I put on Pearl Jam 10, I'm blown away. Like, it's the best thing I've ever heard in the studio. Way better than I've ever thought that album sounded out of the studio. So it's a speaker that makes things sound really, 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 really good. But without the BXT on it, I don't think it's the same speaker. So when you see people tell you how great they are and how clear and are they using the BXT or not? I'm not sponsored by any of these companies, and this is just my thoughts and opinions after literally months of trying to figure this out for myself. So while it's all fresh, I had to throw you the quickest rundown I could do, and I know it wasn't that quick. Best I could do. Yeah. So when they show up, I'll let you know. But I'm extremely excited. And if anybody has questions, comments, and anybody wants to debate the differences between analog speakers and digital speakers, The only really important part about this that anybody should be thinking about is what sounds the best in order to get, like, best, meaning what makes you deliver the best mix, in my opinion. That's what sounds the best to me. I don't care how good it sounds if I can't mix on it. So to me, it's just that, but it's also about, what feeds it might matter, because when you have an analog only speaker like ATCs, you must feed it with something good. Now, DACs today are at a very high level, so I'm not saying that you can't get great results out of, like, DACs that aren't that expensive. We're not going to get into the DAC conversation, but I just feel it's necessary to tell you that I was using, to feed it, I was using the JCF Latte Audio. I mean, the JCF Audio Latte. Just to be totally upfront, I have to tell you, that's what feeds it, and what a phenomenal experience. I haven't yet tried the, what do you call it, the freaking RME UFX3, which is also, I could feed it with that. I just didn't. But when I get the 50s, I'll probably try it with both, and then I'll give you my opinion on which is better. But the point is, I have the Latte, and I don't plan on letting it go anywhere because it's just so versatile and a pretty cool piece. So that's going to be my DA, but I will obviously try it with the RME just to see what the difference is and if it helps anything or whatever. But when it came to the other stuff, the Genelecs, I tried them digitally, I tried them analog. I tried the Kiis digitally, analog. And the coolest part about speakers that don't have DSP in them, the coolest part is the no latency factor. So if you are tracking, you don't have to worry about that as much. There are modes on these speakers that you can kind of remove the latency from being an issue, though. So I wouldn't consider that a make or break thing if you're considering any of these. Just realize it's something you have to do, is flip kind of basically go into a different mode that doesn't have as much latency. But if you're mixing and stuff, you don't have to ever worry about that. If you're listening, you don't have to worry about it. And if you're just considering these speakers for like listening purposes, to sit and chill and hear music as amazing as possible, I would have to be lying to not tell you how amazing the Kiis sounded. Literally almost against, like a foot away from a bare wall at the back, literally a bare, like, wood paneled wall. But then I also tried it with, like, this mass loaded vinyl behind it kind of thing, which is part of another thing I have. And then I tried it with and it sounded probably best right near the bare wall, honestly, or with the mass loaded vinyl thing, which is just a relatively hard surface, kind of. So either one of those sounded great. You didn't need, like, a panel behind it or anything for it to kick sound in a way that makes music sound so good. And if you turn the boundary EQ up or down on it, you just wind up losing low end. Like, it gives you less. It's, maybe more direct, but it's really there for if there's too much low end overwhelming things, you can tame it. But one of the best parts about that speaker was actually not using the Trinnov and being like, man, these things sound amazing without the Trinnov. Like, what? So good. So if that's what you're going for, a great listening experience, those are great. Could I mix on them? No. And, a lot of this, like I said, how your ears work. Certain people may be able to hear different things through them than I do, and they hear wrong, right? For me, literally everything sounded pretty amazing on them. You'd push things in different directions and just be like, oh, better A, better B. Both great. It's like, no, they're not. They're not. You go to the car and the car's like, they're not, man. So I don't know, but this is just my take. This is also why listening to these in other rooms doesn't matter. Don't let anybody tell you to go to their studio, listen to them, check them out, whatever, they're here. I don't think that makes a difference in the world, because depending on how your room is set up, where the treatment is, where you're going to put the speakers, and maybe you'll move it here and there, and what kind of desk do you have, how far away are you going to sit from it, like, how tall are your stands, are they adjustable, is your chair until you figure all this out and put them where you're actually going to use them, none of it matters. It's going to sound different. You'll hear how great they sound. It's going to sound different. If anything, I'd say, the Kii will sound great everywhere, probably, based on my experience with them. They'll probably sound great everywhere. That doesn't mean you can mix on them. Anyway, that's where we're going to leave it. ATC 50's on the way. Could I have gotten away with just the 45s, if that's your question? Maybe. And if I didn't have that problem in them, where the netting was doing whatever, maybe. If that didn't happen, they'd probably been here. Genelecs would have gone back, and there would have never been talk about anything else. But because that happened, I was forced to kind of look at the signs and be like, this isn't right. You know, if I could help it, I'd give it a little more clarity in the low end. Maybe I can stretch. What can I sell? You know what I'm saying? I'd be on that page. And that's where I wound up. So hope it's no surprise how I got here. Let me know if you have any questions. Throw them in the comments. If you stuck around this long, you're awesome. And you deserve to know, if you've been following, day 3, leg day, happened today, and I could barely walk. I'm hobbling over here because I went way too hard on the first leg day back of, on the gym excursion extravaganza, or however we're going to call that thing. So stick around, stay tuned, keep everything solid mentally, physically, and you got the best chance of having a great day tomorrow. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Take it easy. Evan Jaffe, Custom Cut Studios. You guys got this. Take it easy.